While you are busy complaining about your 2025 problems, imagine waking up in a year when 1/3 of everyone you know is about to die. The year 1347 was not just terrible. It shattered the very structure of human society, leaving wounds that still echo through history. You open your eyes and instantly know something is horribly wrong. The first thing that hits you is the smell. A nauseating blend of human waste, spoiled food, and unwashed bodies that could knock you off your feet. Welcome to 1347, where perfume is a fantasy, and deodorant will not exist for another 6 centuries. The noise is just as bad. Chickens cluck from every corner, while pigs grunt their way through filthy streets, devouring anything that remotely resembles food. And those streets? They are open sewers where people toss their chamber pots straight out the window. Hope you like surprises. Better make sure you have something sturdy on your feet. Everywhere you look, there is no sign of modern life. No lights, no gentle hum of electricity, no phones or computers. When night falls, the world disappears into darkness, except for a few weak candle flames or smoky oil lamps that few can afford. The night belongs to shadows and to the eerie sounds that move through them. And then you notice the people. Everyone looks filthy by modern standards. The friend who complains about missing one shower would be the cleanest person in this entire town. Most people bathe once or twice a year. The wealthy might indulge in 4 baths if fortune smiles on them. The rest simply accept the smell as part of existence. Water comes from wells often contaminated by the same waste that runs through the streets. Safe drinking water is rare. Wheat beer is the daily drink of choice because it is safer than the water. Even small children drink watered-down ale instead of risking illness. Transportation is equally bleak. You walk everywhere unless you are rich enough to own a horse. No cars, no carriages, no bicycles. Most people will live and die within 10 miles of where they were born. The world feels impossibly vast when your only speed is your own 2 feet through endless mud and animal droppings. Technology? Forget it. Every task requires human hands. Tools are simple and crude. Making a shirt means spinning thread, weaving cloth, and stitching every piece by hand. Food comes only if the harvest succeeds, and if it fails, there is no backup plan, no store down the road. Farming is everything. Local markets are small gatherings where people barter for bread, vegetables, and whatever little they can make themselves. Blacksmiths, cobblers, bakers, and farmers hold the community together. Life depends on cooperation because no one can survive alone. But while you are adjusting to this grim medieval reality, something far worse is already creeping closer. Strange whispers drift through the trade routes. Rumors of illness spreading across distant lands. Your cozy morning routine does not exist here. No warm shower, no clean clothes, no refrigerator humming softly in the corner. Instead, you are crammed into a wooden hut smaller than a modern garage, packed with your entire family and maybe another. The walls are thin, the floor is dirt, and privacy is a concept no one has imagined. Breakfast is not cereal and coffee. It is a piece of hard black bread that could double as a weapon, a bowl of watery porridge, and if luck is on your side, a bit of cheese that smells like it was aged in someone's shoe. Meat appears once a week at best, and you try not to ask too many questions about what it is or how old it might be. And here is where the horror really begins. That small cut you got yesterday, it might kill you. There are no antibiotics, no knowledge of bacteria, and barely any medical care. A small infection can become fatal. A broken bone can end your mobility forever. Childbirth is life-threatening, and a toothache can become a death sentence. Travel is another nightmare. Visiting the next village might take days, and the roads are dangerous. Bandits, wild animals, and exhaustion claim travelers regularly. For most, the edge of their known world is only a few miles away. The rest of the world is a mystery too distant to imagine. Personal freedom barely exists. The church dominates everything. It decides what you eat, when you rest, whom you marry, and what you are allowed to believe. Disagree, and you risk not only punishment from local rulers, but eternal damnation in the afterlife. Justice is uneven, often decided by wealth or birth rather than truth. The poor have little hope if the rich accuse them of wrongdoing. It makes sense in a grim way. When survival itself is a struggle, fairness is a luxury no one can afford. Life moves as slowly as oxen dragging heavy carts. Every task is exhausting. Every day is uncertain. Yet people still find ways to live, to laugh, to share moments of joy amid hardship. They build families, sing songs, and pray for better times. But the worst is yet to come. Across the sea, ships are already carrying something far more dangerous than silk or spices. By the time they reach Sicily in 1347, they will bring death itself, the Black Death that will consume a third of the world. Those black rats hiding deep inside the cargo holds of ships carried a deadly secret no one expected. The fleas living on their bodies leapt from rat to rat, then from rats to humans, spreading a disease that would make every past illness seem like a mild fever. Within weeks, something horrifying began happening to people in the coastal towns. High fevers struck first, burning through victims like fire in dry grass. Then came the swellings, enormous lumps called buboes that appeared under the arms, around the neck, and in the groin. These were not tiny bumps. They swelled to the size of apples, dark and leaking fluid, causing pain so severe that grown men screamed for mercy. But the worst part was the speed. Death came fast. Someone could wake up feeling healthy on Monday, grow sick by Tuesday, break out in those monstrous lumps by Wednesday, and be gone before the week was over. Entire families vanished within days. The lucky ones died quickly. Others suffered through days of agony, coughing up blood and drifting in and out of madness before their bodies gave out. The plague spared no one. It did not care about money, faith, or social rank. Rich traders with fine houses and clean clothing? Dead. Holy men who prayed daily for protection? Dead. Even the doctors trying to save others began to collapse one after another. It makes you wonder what all that medieval medicine was really worth. Then came the panic. Shopkeepers fled in the middle of sales when customers fell to the floor. Market stalls stood abandoned, food rotting in the sun while their owners lay dying at home. The busy streets turned silent except for the rumble of carts carrying the dead. Those carts no longer transported goods, but corpses wrapped in old sheets and rags. People tried everything to protect themselves. They burned herbs, hoping to chase away bad air they believed caused the illness. Some locked themselves indoors for weeks, refusing to see anyone. Others went to extremes, whipping themselves bloody in public, thinking that pain might earn them forgiveness from God. None of it helped. What started in the warm ports of the Mediterranean spread like wildfire across the continent. The trade routes that once brought silk and spices now carried death, following the paths of merchants and pilgrims. And this was only the beginning. What came next made these early days look almost merciful, as entire towns were forced to choose between compassion and survival. Trust collapsed overnight. Friends avoided one another. Neighbors who once shared meals and tools now crossed the road in silence. Fear outweighed kindness, and everyone began thinking only of themselves. The dead piled up faster than anyone could bury them. Churchyards filled within weeks. New graves were dug outside the city walls, long trenches where bodies were dumped in heaps. There were no prayers, no candles, only shovels tossing dirt onto decaying flesh. Families stopped holding funerals because even mourning together could mean death. Parents faced unbearable choices. When children developed the dreaded swellings, mothers and fathers had to decide whether to stay and die together or flee to save their own lives. Many chose to run. The air was filled with the cries of children left behind, while parents disappeared into the countryside. The church, once the great pillar of hope, could not explain what was happening. Priests died as quickly as their parishioners. The survivors struggled to understand why a loving God would allow such terror. Was it punishment? Was it the end of the world? No one knew, and that uncertainty drove people to despair. When even the holy men were terrified, faith began to crumble. Governments fell apart soon after. Kings issued commands that no one obeyed because their messengers were already dead. Tax collectors stopped coming, not out of mercy, but because they had been buried. Local officials abandoned their posts. Laws meant nothing when half the town was gone. And then things took a darker turn. Some people decided that if death was coming anyway, they might as well enjoy what time they had left. They broke into empty houses, stole food and gold, and lived recklessly, knowing the end was near. Others joined strange wandering groups known as flagellants. These people believed the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins. They roamed from village to village, beating themselves bloody, thinking that their suffering might persuade God to stop the dying. It did not. The social order that had kept medieval life balanced completely disintegrated. Masters had no servants to work their estates. Lords had no peasants to farm the land. Merchants had no customers to buy their goods. The carefully built system of duty and loyalty crumbled into chaos as people focused on one thing only: staying alive. Even then, no one could grasp how deadly the plague truly was. The numbers were almost beyond comprehension. Around 50 million people perished in only a few years. That is the same as wiping out the entire population of a modern nation like South Korea. But in the 14th century, with far fewer people on Earth, that loss was nothing short of the end of the world. But here is where things turn truly unbelievable. In some European cities, nearly half the population disappeared. Just gone. Norwich in England dropped from around 25,000 people to about 12,000. Florence fell from 100,000 to 50,000 in a matter of months. These were not slow declines stretched over generations. It all happened faster than a severe flu outbreak. Then came the ghost villages. Whole communities wiped out with not a single person left alive. No witnesses, no survivors, only empty houses standing in silence. Doors left open, meals still sitting on tables now covered with dust and crawling with rats. Some of these places were never lived in again, becoming only stories told by travelers passing through. The strange part was that no one understood what was killing them. People blamed bad air, the alignment of the planets, or claimed that Jewish people had poisoned the wells. Others believed God had finally run out of patience with humanity. Some even thought the world was ending entirely. Hard to argue when you are watching everything collapse around you. Every family lost someone. Wealth meant nothing. Nobility and peasants alike ended up in the same burial pits. Kings laid their sons beside common farmers because there was no time or strength left for royal funerals. The constant presence of death changed how people viewed life itself. Why save coins for the future when the future might not come? Why obey every church rule when priests were dying just as quickly as thieves? The mental damage was almost as severe as the physical suffering. Medieval medicine had no chance against this nightmare. Doctors tried cutting veins to release bad blood, burning herbs, and wearing strange bird-shaped masks filled with spices. Nothing worked. People were dying too fast for anyone to count, let alone find a cure. But the most frightening thing was how quickly it spread. The sickness leapt from person to person, family to family, town to town, moving with terrifying speed. Within days of the first victim, dozens more would fall sick. Yet somehow, a few people survived. When they finally looked around at the empty homes, the abandoned markets, and the ruined villages, they realized their world was never going back to what it had been. You might imagine that when half your neighbors die, life would slow down and become quiet. The truth was the opposite. Everything fell apart faster than ever. Picture walking through what used to be a busy farming region. Fields that should be glowing gold with ripe wheat now lie brown and spoiled. There is no one left to harvest. The farmers are gone. Their children are gone. Even the overseers who organized the work are dead. Food that could have fed hundreds is left to rot, while nearby towns starve. Desperation brings crime. When people are hungry enough, stealing no longer feels like sin, but survival. Ordinary citizens who had never broken a rule began breaking into empty homes, taking whatever they needed to live. The authorities could not stop them because there were no authorities left. The legal system had collapsed along with everything else. But here is where it gets fascinating. Those who managed to live through the plague suddenly found themselves in high demand. This was a world that relied completely on human labor. With half the workers gone, the survivors could now choose where to work and how much they wanted to be paid. A blacksmith who once earned just enough to survive could now ask for double. Farmers demanded higher prices for their crops. Rich landowners, who had always enjoyed cheap labor, hated this new reality. For the first time in history, peasants had real bargaining power. They could tell their lords, "Pay me more, or I will work for someone else." And they meant it. Because suddenly, everyone needed workers. Makes sense, right? When there are more jobs than people to fill them, the workers hold all the power. Former peasants began asking for better food, better homes, and decent treatment. Some even left their villages altogether, something that had been practically forbidden before the plague. The church, meanwhile, faced a crisis of faith. How do you convince people that God loves them when he just allowed half of Europe to die? Priests were dying as quickly as their followers, and that shattered trust. If holy men were no safer than anyone else, then perhaps divine protection was not real at all. Religious confidence started to crumble. This was not just an economic change, but a complete transformation of society. The old medieval structure, where everyone knew their place and never moved from it, began falling apart in only a few short years. The world that replaced it looked nothing like the one that came before. The speed of it all is almost impossible to imagine. In just 3 years, Europe changed from a stable, orderly society into a chaotic new world with shifting values and broken traditions. The question that lingered was whether this transformation would last or fade once the crisis passed. The numbers tell the story better than anything else. 1/3 of Europe's population gone in 3 years. Around 50 million people erased from existence faster than anyone thought possible. Entire bloodlines ended overnight. Family names that had stood for centuries vanished completely from the records, lost forever to the plague that reshaped the world. But what truly made 1347 stand out as Europe's darkest year was not only the staggering death toll, though that alone was terrifying. The plague tore apart everything people thought they understood about life and faith. Kings perished just like peasants. Priests collapsed while blessing the dying. And wealthy traders with vaults of gold discovered that money meant nothing when death came calling. The medieval world believed that God rewarded virtue and punished sin. That entire belief system fell apart almost overnight. When infants died in their mother's arms and holy men dropped dead at the altar, people began questioning the very core of their faith. Churches across Europe had to completely redo their schedules. Why? Because there were not enough priests left alive to perform the simplest rites. Weddings were postponed indefinitely. Religious feasts vanished from the calendar. In some parishes, no priest appeared for months because every clergyman had either died or fled in terror. Then came the economic disaster that followed. Imagine showing up for work and finding half your fellow laborers gone forever. Not missing, not away on business, but buried in plague pits. That was the grim reality across every craft and trade. Blacksmiths, farmers, carpenters, and soldiers vanished in huge numbers. In some regions, entire professions nearly went extinct. The strange thing was how uneven it all seemed. Some towns were nearly wiped out, while others nearby escaped almost untouched. Geography played a huge role, though no one understood how or why. One village might lose nearly everyone, while another just a few miles away survived with only a handful of deaths. Luck alone decided who lived and who died. What made it worse was how powerless people were to fight back. They had no concept of germs, no effective medicine, and no system for sanitation. They faced an unseen killer with nothing but prayers, charms, and desperate rituals. The emotional wounds ran deep. Survivors lived with what we would now call trauma. Their art grew grim, their stories obsessed over death, their music filled with sorrow. Europe eventually pulled itself back from the edge, but it took generations. The world that came out of those years was utterly changed. Society, economy, and faith all evolved into something new, forged by 3 years of terror that began in 1347.